Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing well. So we are continuing our reading of Sahih al Bukhari. Wonderful, wonderful. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We're in the chapter of Wudu. It's highly important. Let's continue. Chapter 39. The washing of feet up to the ankles. Narrated Amr. My father saw Amr bin Abi Hassan asking Abdullah bin Zayd, may Allah be pleased with him, about the ablution of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Abdullah bin Zayd asked for earthenware pot containing water, and performed ablution like that of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in front of them. He poured water from the pot over his hand and washed his hands thrice, and then he put his hands in the pot and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out with 3 handfuls of water. Again he put his hand in the water and washed his face thrice, and washed his forearms up to the elbows twice, and then put his hands in the water and then passed them over his head by bringing them to the front and then to the rear of the head once. And then he washed his feet up to the ankles. Okay, so we see thrice, 3, thrice, twice, and once, and then all the way up to the ankles. Chapter 40. The using of the remaining water after ablution. And Jarir bin Abdullah ordered the members of his family to perform ablution with the water in which he had put his siwak, a piece of root of a tree called al-arak, used as a toothbrush. So I think he just probably dipped it in there. I don't think he actually spat in there. That'd be kind of... I don't think that would make sense. Narrated Abu Juhayfa, may Allah be pleased with him. Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, came to us at noon, and water for ablution was brought to him. After he had performed ablution, the remaining water was taken by the people, and they started smearing their bodies with it as a blessing. The Prophet, peace be upon him, offered 2 rak'ah of the Duhur prayer and then 2 rak'ah of the Asr prayer, while an anaza, spear-headed stick, was there as a sutra in front of him. Now I wonder, that obviously it doesn't look like it was a demand, it just looks like something that they did. Kind of just showing you the frenzy with which they were eager. Abu Musa, may Allah be pleased with him, said, the Prophet, peace be upon him, asked for a tumbler containing water, and washed both his hands and face in it, and then threw a mouthful of water in the tumbler, and said to both of us, Abu Musa and Bilal, drink from the tumbler and pour some of its water on your faces and chest. So we know that from previous hadiths, you're supposed to wash your hands before you put it in the container. You pour water onto your hands before inserting it in. So I think here they probably did the same. It's probably implied. Not directly stated each time. Narrated Ibn Shihab, Mahmud bin Arabi, may Allah be pleased with him, said, who was the person on whose face the Prophet, peace be upon him, had ejected a mouthful of water from his family while he was a boy. And Urwa, on the authority of Al-Miswar and others who testified each other, said, whenever the Prophet, peace be upon him, performed ablution, his companions were nearly fighting for the remains of that water. Okay. Narrated As-Sayyib bin Yazid, may Allah be pleased with him, my aunt took me to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said, O Allah's Messenger, this son of my sister has got a disease in his legs. So he, peace be upon him, passed his hands on my head and prayed for Allah's blessing for me. Then he performed ablution, and I drank from the remaining water. I stood behind him and saw the seal of prophethood between his shoulders. Interesting. I saw the seal of prophethood. And it was like the Ziril Hajjala, means the button of a small tent. But some said egg of a partridge. Interesting. I don't know what that one means exactly, but it is interesting. Chapter 41. rinsing one's mouth and putting water in one's nose and cleaning it by blowing the water out with a single handful of water. Narrated Amr bin Yahya, on the authority of his father, Abdullah bin Zayd, may Allah be pleased with him, poured water on his hands from a utensil containing water, and washed them, and then, with one handful of water, he rinsed his mouth and cleaned his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out. He repeated thrice. He then washed his hands and forearms up to the elbows twice, and passed wet hands over his head, both forwards and backwards, and washed his feet up to the ankles, and said, "Thus was the ablution of Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him." So another one referencing up to the elbows and up to the ankles. Chapter 42. The passing of wet hands over the head, once only while performing ablution. Narrated Amr bin Yahya, may Allah be pleased with him. My father said, I saw Amr bin Abi Hassan asking Abdullah bin Zayd about the ablution of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Abdullah bin Zayd asked for an earthenware pot containing water and performed ablution in front of them. He poured water over his hands and washed them thrice. Then he put his right hand in the pot and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it and then blowing it out thrice in 3 handfuls of water. Again, he put his hand in the water and washed his face thrice. After that, he put his hand in the pot and washed his forearms up to the elbows twice. Then again put his hand in the water and passed wet hands over his head by bringing them from the front to the back and returned them, and once more he put his hand in the pot and washed his feet up to the ankles. Narrated Wahib, may Allah be pleased with him, that he, the Prophet, peace be upon him, as in narration 191 above, had passed his wet hands on the head only once. Chapter 43. The performance of ablution by a man along with his wife. The utilization of water remaining after a woman has performed ablution. Umar performed ablution with warm water and with water brought from the house of a Christian woman. Ooh, warm water, okay. Sometimes I would feel bad if I used warm water, because the cold water, I like it because it shocks you. But then there's sometimes where it's like, can I use warm water sometimes if I want? Because sometimes you just feel a little cozy. So, let's see. And narrated Abdullah bin Umar, during the lifetime of Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, men and women used to perform ablution together. So you can use the same vessel, because maybe you're not able to have separate ones. Chapter 44. The sprinkling of remaining water after performing ablution on an unconscious person by the Prophet, peace be upon him. Narrated Jabir, may Allah be pleased with him, Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, came to visit me while I was sick and unconscious. He performed ablution and sprinkled the remaining water on me, and I became conscious and said, O Allah's Messenger, to whom will my inheritance go, as I have neither ascendants nor descendants? Then the divine verse regarding Farad, inheritance, were revealed. Oh, okay. So Jabir, see, poor guy, must have some kids. Chapter 45. To take a bath or perform ablution from a mikhabdab, utensil, tumbler, or a wooden or stone pot. I think you need a lot of water to bath from a tiny thing like that, right? Unless it's like a huge thing, like how many gallons, you know? Narrated Anas, may Allah be pleased with him, it was the time for Salah prayer, and those whose house were near got up and went to their people to perform ablution, and there remaining some people sitting. Then a painted stone pot, mikhdab, containing water, was brought to Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him. The pot was small, not broad enough for one to spread one's hand in, yet all the people performed ablution. The sub-narrator said, We asked Anas, how many persons were you? Anas replied, We were 80 or more. It was one of the miracles of Allah's Messenger. Okay, so the stone pot, mikdab. So then it gets given to him. It's not broad enough for one's hands yet. The people got to perform ablution. So I'm going to write the miracle. And I'm going to write water. So here you got an example of, let's put a little bookmark there, a little tag for us, of a miracle of the Prophet, peace be upon him, mashallah. Narrated, Abu Musa, may Allah be pleased with him, once the Prophet, peace be upon him, asked for a tumbler containing water. He washed his hands and face in it, and also threw a mouthful of water in it. In it? Threw a mouthful of water in it. Because I know the other hadith said you don't breathe in the vessel, but bacteria in your mouth, why would you spit it back in? Threw a mouthful of water in it. Washed his hands. I don't know what that one means. Because you can't do wudu from water that you spit in. It'd stink. Narrated Abdullah bin Zayd, may Allah be pleased with him. Once Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, came to us, and we brought out water for him in a brass pot. He performed ablution thus. He washed his face thrice, and his forearms to the elbows twice. Then passed his wet hands lightly over the head from front to rear, and brought them to front again, and washed his feet up to the ankles. Narrated Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, when the ailment of the Prophet, peace be upon him, aggravated and his disease became worse, he asked his wives to permit him to be nurse-treated in my house. So they gave him the permission. Then the Prophet, peace be upon him, came to my house with the support of 2 men, and his legs were dragging on the ground. Between Abbas and another man, Ubayd Ullah, the sub-narrator, said, I informed Abdullah bin Abbas of what Aisha said. Ibn Abbas said, do you know who was the other man? I replied in the negative. Ibn Abbas said, he was Ali bin Abi Talib. Oh, okay, so Ali, then we have Aisha, we have Ibn Abbas. Aisha further said, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, came to my house, and his sickness became worse, he ordered us to pour 7 skins full of water on him, so that he might give some advice to the people. So he was seated in the mikdab, brass tub, belonging to Hafsa, the wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Then all of us started pouring water on him from the water skins till he beckoned to us to stop, and that we have done what he wanted us to do. After that he went out to the people. So good soak, like just to help wake up and put your mind at sort of ease. Temperature might be hot too. 46. To perform ablution from an earthenware pot. Narrated Amr bin Yahya on the authority of his father, my uncle used to perform ablution extravagantly, and once he asked Abdullah bin Zayd to tell him how he had seen the Prophet, peace be upon him, performing ablution. He asked for an earthenware pot containing water, and poured water from it on his hands, and washed them thrice, and then put his hand in the earthenware pot, and rinsed his mouth and washed his nose by putting water in it, and then blowing it out thrice with 1 handful of water. He again put his hand in the water and took a handful of water, and washed his face thrice. Then washed his hands up to the elbows twice, and took water with his hand and passed it over his head from the front to back, and then from back to front, and then washed his feet up to the ankles, and said, I saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, performing ablution in that way. So up to the ankles, up to the elbows twice, washed his face thrice. So the handful of water appears to be a good measurement, which is pretty standard, right? Okay, fam. Hope you learned something. We definitely did. I feel like I did, and it's really cool just seeing the dense information on the purification process. Very focused on hygiene. It's very good.